Hello, quilting friends. My name is Pam Hultgren-Klein. Welcome to my sewing table. Today, I plan to introduce you to one of Sharon Hultgren's tools, the Easy 8. With the Easy 8, we will be able to create beautiful 8-pointed stars. And in fact, I'm planning to show you two different techniques. You may want to try an Easy 8-pointed star using the Y seam, or some people say set-in method, or you might say, let me try it a different way. And if you would prefer, we'll do an 8-pointed star using our Easy 8 and our Easy Angle and no set-ins. I look forward to showing you both of these techniques today. So let's head to the cutting table. Now we're at the cutting table. We're ready to cut our diamonds to make 8-pointed stars using our Easy 8. Our first decision is, what size do we want to make our diamonds? And the tool itself gives you many sizes to choose from. If I'm going to turn it upside down so you can see the size choices, you can go all the way from a 4-inch down to a 1-inch. And if you would say, Pam, what does 4-inch mean? Because that doesn't look like 4 inches from the top to the bottom. You would be absolutely right. When Sharon designed this tool, she wanted a finished edge to the diamond that would be 4 inches or 3.5 inches, but she wanted that measure to be convenient and cohesive with a traditional ruler. So you'll be able to fit in a square right up here that is a finished 4-inch square or 3.5, and so forth and so on. So when you see those numbers, it doesn't mean that that's the width of your diamond. It means that's the finished edge for the, if you want to say, the angle of your diamond, so that you'll be able to put in a square right beside it using those same measurements. All right. So let's decide that for today, we're going to do a 3-inch diamond, a little bit smaller, kind of fun to try. All right. So we begin by creating our strips. And when we do our strips for our diamonds, we need to be looking at the words Easy 8. If we can see the words, then we've got our tool going in the right direction. And then we look at the small little numbers right here. I see 4. I see 3.5. There's 3. So I line up the bottom edge of my tool with the bottom edge of my fabric at that 3-inch spot. All right. And if it's right there at 3-inch, actually I can see 3-inch over here as well. Now I'm right-handed, so I'm going to slide this all the way to the end of my fabric over here. And I'm going to line up 3 inches, 3 inches like that. And I'm going to hold my ruler down and cut all the way across. Now, in this case, we get to about right here, and my tool is not long enough to go all the way to the end of my fabric. So I do not move my rotary cutter. That stays exactly where it is, but I take my tool and I just slide it down, okay? And if I bump it against the rotary cutter right there, and I check, I see 3-inch right there. I can make sure 3 inches lined up against the bottom edge of the fabric, again, just right there. And I can hold it steady with my left hand, and then I can finish my cut and go all the way across. That is how you cut the strip that you will need to use your Easy 8 to create an 8-pointed star. Now that we've cut our strip using our Easy 8 tool, and we decided to cut on the 3-inch line of the Easy 8 tool, we were able to read the words Easy 8. But to cut our diamonds, we take the tool and we spin it around. And now instead of reading the words, they're going to be upside down, but we can read the numbers within the diamond very clearly. And we want 3-inch. So what we're going to do is push our tool all the way out past that edge, right to where our bottom of our tool is still flush with the bottom of our strip, and our angle is going just about to the top edge right there, because we need to set the angle for our diamonds. So we're going to hold our tool firmly like this, and I'm going to make my first cut like that. And now I have the angle set to make 8-pointed stars. So now I simply slide the tool over until I can read 3-inch. My angle is at the edge of my fabric. My tool is at the bottom edge of my fabric. Even the top edge of the fabric meets where it says 3-inch. So I know I have that in just the right place. I hold it firmly and cut, and I have a diamond. Now I do cut these about two at a time. I don't get too carried away because you want them to be consistent, but I have 2 diamonds. To make an 8-pointed star, we need 8 diamonds. So I'll just show you one more time. We take our tool and we slide down until we have the 3 highlighted right at the top edge of the fabric. We have the angle right along the edge of the fabric there. We're flush across the bottom, so we can hold it steady and get 2 more of our diamonds. And when I have all 8 diamonds cut, I am ready to go to the sewing machine. Wow. Now that we've finished cutting the diamonds that will make our 8-pointed star, we need to cut our secondary fabric. And as we think about how do I plan for cutting that secondary fabric, I would ask you to remember our Easy 8 tool. When we used our Easy 8 tool, we decided for this star, we were cutting a finished 3-inch edge to our diamonds. That means that this spot on the diamond in every place is 3 inches finished. Well, then we use that and we think, okay, that means this square also needs to be finished 3 inches, which means when I'm cutting squares, I cut my strip at 3.5. And when I look, I'm going to need 1, 2, 3, 4 3.5-inch squares to do a finished 3-inch square. I also have 1, 2, 3, 4 half square triangles. They also will be cut on that same 3.5-inch strip. Okay, so let's set this to the side. Here is our 3.5-inch strip. And so I'm going to get out my easy square and I'm going to place it at 3.5 by 3.5 and cut 2 squares. And I'll cut 2 more squares. And then after I've cut my squares, I'm going to set my square tool to the side. I'm going to grab my easy angle and find the 3.5-inch spot on my easy angle, push the 3.5-inch line to the edge of my fabric and cut on the diagonal. And there I have 2 of my triangles that I need. And then with our easy angle, we take our tool and we flip it on the diagonal. We make sure that the angle matches the edge of the fabric. We make sure that the top says 3.5 because we have a 3.5-inch wide strip. Our little flag is hanging below the line at the bottom. Hold on tight and we cut, and we have our other 2 triangles. And now we're all set to make our 8-pointed star block. All right, we have our diamonds cut and we're ready to put them together to create our 8-pointed star. When we do that, I take 2 of them right sides together and I line them up perfectly. I notice where my point is that's going to go to the sewing machine first, and I also notice my wide angle. And down here on my wide angle, I take a moment and I create a stop sign for myself. I take my ruler that has a dashed line at the 1/4 inch seam and I put it out to the edge of my fabric, and I just make a tiny little mark. And I may be the only one who can see it, but I'm the only one who needs to see it, right? So then I've got that little stop sign ready for myself. I actually will take a pin and I'll put it in play right there at the top. I will put a second pin down here at the bottom. And now it's ready to go to the sewing machine. Point first, 1/4 inch seam all the way down to the stop sign and stop right there. Do that with all 4 pairs, and then you're ready for the next step. Now that I have my pairs sewn from the top point down, stopped at the stop sign, I'm ready to take them to the iron. And this is so important. When we iron our diamonds for our 8-pointed star, we always open to the left and iron to the left, and like give it a good push with your iron, opening it up to the left. Always do it the exact same way. If you are consistent with doing it this way every single time, when you put your whole star together, it will fit together so beautifully and it will lay so flat. My mother says if you need the reminder, just look at it and say, does that look like a pair of pants? And if it does, you did it the correct way. So every single pair now is going to get ironed, opened, flat. We're ready for the next step of putting our star together. I prefer to work in small parts of my star, so I'm actually going to put the secondary block in first before I put the whole star together. In doing that, I notice where that square is going to go. I literally turn it on my cutting board so I can see I need a square in that spot right there. And then I go and I get this is my secondary fabric. I have it right side up. And then what I'm going to do next is I'm going to take the top part of the diamond and I'm going to pull it down so it's basically out of the way. And because we stopped a 1/4 inch before, I can see all the way to the end of that diamond that's below right there. Okay, then I'm going to do another little trick where I'm going to find the 1/4 inch on my star going this way, and I'm going to find it going this way, so I know right where it is, and it is going to be like right about there. Okay, when I know where that spot is, then I can take my pin and sometimes I'll poke it in there like ahead of time, like right there it is right there. And I can bring it to that stop sign that we created earlier and bring it right there. And then I know that this end is in the right space. Okay, so when I lay that up flat and I pin that spot in play, then I can lay it out flat, and I should have a little flag just like our easy angle little flag at this end. And then I'll take a pin and I'll put it in there at this end. And now I will start sewing at the point, 1/4 inch all the way down, and stop at our stop sign once again. 1/4 inch in and stop at the stop sign. All right, ready for the sewing machine. Now we have the first seam sewn, putting a secondary block to our diamonds. And now that we have that seam sewn from here and we stopped right here, we need to finish putting that in by sewing this seam right here. So here's how we do that. First, I'm going to take the secondary fabric square and I'm going to pull it up, and I'm actually going to give it a little bit of a pull so it sort of rolls under, and I'm sort of finger pressing, shall I say, that seam down towards the diamond. So and then there's a reason for doing that. It'll make it so much easier in just a moment. Okay, so go ahead and give that a little tug and make sure that you've tugged that seam underneath. Then we're going to bring this diamond and lay it up like that. And we're going to, what you could say, like close the window. We're going to take this side and fold it right sides together. And when we do that, we should be able to lay this one down so that the edge of our fabric meets in both places. We can check and see if our 1/4 inch seam is meeting right at that little dot, which it is, or our little stop sign, shall I say. We have a flag up on top, up there. So if I hold firmly, I can pin this in 2 places up here towards the top. And I'm going to do one more pin, pushing the fabrics out of the way, because we're going to sew from the point all the way down to that little 1/4 inch stop sign right there. Okay, there we go. So we'll go from the top and we'll stop where the 1/4 inch seam is meeting in all those places. There we go. And once we have that done, we'll have actually about 1/4 of our 8-pointed star all sewn together. We just sewed from the point down to the 1/4 inch seam on this vertical seam right here, putting 2 of our diamonds with one of our secondary squares. The next important thing to do is to iron correctly. So when I open this up, what I'm going to do is to work counterclockwise, and starting with the seam that I already ironed flat, I'll push with my iron. I'll come up here and I'll keep pushing my iron to the left, and then I'll push with my iron downward. This one we finger pressed a few minutes ago, so it should go quite nicely. And literally just do sort of a circle motion, up, over, down, counterclockwise. And if you do that carefully, you should get a perfect little pinwheel on the back of your piece. All right, and so now that I've done that with all 4 of these, I'm ready to lay this out, and I can see where all 4 quarters are ready to become an 8-pointed star. And if I lay them out like that, then the next step is to let's take the bottom 2 right sides together. All right, and this is our first chance to realize that when we iron those so carefully, we are going to allow those 2 seams to meet where we need to sew, and literally they lock into place, and we will not make a mistake, and we should have just beautiful points matching because those 2 seams are going to lock into place. So we'll put a pin right there so that we can get that to the sewing machine like that. We'll go down to this spot down here. Here we have that wide angle again. So at this point, if you wanted to put a little stop sign for yourself at the 1/4 inch, you absolutely could. We're going to pin it in place, and then our seam that we're going to sew will be from all the way at the outside edge and going all the way to that 1/4 inch stop sign mark right there. That needs to be done for this pair as well as that pair. Well, because we were so successful with our pinning and our pressing, we have some beautiful points going in our half of our 8-pointed star. Now, again, your choices. You could put the 2 halves together if you want to, but I see another opportunity to put in a background or a secondary block before I put the whole thing together. So I'm going to grab 2 of my easy angle pieces, the triangles that we cut with a 3.5 inch strip, and one is going to go on top and one is going to go down here on the bottom. And I'm going to use the exact same process that I used for putting in the square. When we go to place the triangle secondary fabric into our 8-pointed star, we use the same technique we used for the square. I always turn it so it looks like a square. I lay it in place. I'm going to do that bottom seam first, and then I'll do the vertical seam, just like I did with the squares. So that will be the next step for completing our 8-pointed star. Well, now we have our secondary triangle into our 8-pointed star block, and we are ready to put the 2 halves together. Now I am going to stop and mention this to you. Please remember every single time to do that same ironing pattern of counterclockwise. Again, these 2 seams are laying down flat because we continued that counterclockwise idea when we ironed. Okay, so we have this half, which is nice and flat. This half is nice and flat. We have a perfect point here and a perfect point here. We're ready to take the top half, bring it down to the bottom half. Because of the way we ironed, those seams are going to lock into place perfectly. And what I will do is feel that center seam first and make sure that's locked into place. And then I'm going to feel the seam on my left, and I can feel that this diagonal seam over here on the left is also locked into place. And then I'm going to feel the right one, and I can feel that that's locked into place. Sometimes people will poke a pin right at the 1/4-inch seam to double check and make sure. That's totally a worthwhile idea. I am just so grateful that we know to do that with our seams as far as ironing and locking in place, because that seems to be the trick. So now I will pin on this side, and I'm going to pin on this side of that center seam. And then after I've pinned the center, and I'm quite confident of that, then I'll come out here to the edge. And when I get out to the edge, my outside diamonds match out there. And what you probably will notice is that that angle is the broad angle, or that wider angle of our diamond again. So this is another spot where we're going to start a 1/4-inch in. Okay, we're going to start a 1/4-inch in when we sew all the way from here across to down there, 1/4-inch in, and we will end a 1/4-inch before the end, because those will be our last 2 set-in spots with our last 2 secondary pieces of fabric. So now I'm going to go to the machine and I'm going to sew straight down. I might add one more pin here to keep it all in place, and then I'll be ready to show you the next step for ironing before we put in our final 2 secondary pieces. I need to do one last ironing job. I have sewn from one end of my star to the other end of my star. Before I can do that final ironing step, I need to take out a couple of stitches. There's about 3 stitches that fit from the edge of my fabric down to my stitching line, and those 3 stitches need to go. So I am going to use my ripper, and I'm going to pull them out gently. I am not ripping them out. I'm gently go back and forth, and pretty soon they'll come free like that. And then I'll grab the second stitch, and that one usually comes easier than the first, and give that one out of there. And I think I do have a third one in there, and we'll get that one out of there. Our reason for doing that is that when we go to iron and we're ironing to the left, now this whole diamond section will lay flat like we need it to. Okay, so we're going to flip. I'm going to do the same thing on this side with those 3 stitches, and then I'll show you how it ironed so nice and flat. Our 8-pointed star is almost completely together now. Our points are matching. We've ironed this flat. It has spun around to the left, counterclockwise, all the way around. Every time we saw that pair of pants, we ironed them to the left. And now, because we were consistent with that, we can even look around on the back side, and you can hopefully see that perfect pinwheel that happened because we were consistent with our ironing and our pinning. All right, the last step then is to take these final 2 triangles and to place them as secondary blocks in the top and in the bottom, just like we did on our other secondary blocks. And then we will have our finished 8-pointed star. Well, there you have it, an 8-pointed star all finished. Now, there are some friends who are not quite comfortable doing a Y seam. And so I would also like to show you how to do an easy 8-pointed star using a method that allows you to avoid a Y seam. So let's try that next. Sometimes there might be a reason that you would want to create an 8-pointed star but not worry about a Y seam. If that would be true, there is an easy way to create your 8-pointed star using your easy angle. And so right now I'd like to take a few minutes and show you exactly how we do that. The interesting thing is, truly, when we do it that way, we take each one of our diamonds and we, in a sense, create a half square triangle. And when we put it with a second half square triangle, that creates 1/4 of an 8-pointed star block. And when we put 4 of them together, we have a whole 8-pointed star, and we never had to do a Y seam. So let me show you the couple of things you need to know in order to put together an 8-pointed star without doing any Y seams. To create an 8-pointed star using our easy angle, we begin with our easy 8 again, and we need 8 diamonds created with the easy 8. And if you recall, these diamonds were done on the 3-inch line. When I turn my tool this way, I can see where the 3-inch spot is right there. So I will have a 3-inch finished edge to my diamond. We need that number this time because when we go to create the strips for our secondary fabric, we're going to use our easy 8 tool first. For the smaller triangles that we'll need, we actually use our easy 8 and we cut a strip on the 3-inch line. So I'm going to start down at the end like I've done before. I'm going to put the 3-inch edge of my easy 8 tool along the bottom edge of my fabric. I'll start at this end and I'll cut. When I get to the end of the tool, I leave my rotary cutter in place. I slide my tool down. I check again to be sure that I have 3-inch along the bottom edge. And when I know it's in place, I keep going. For each star, you'll need a strip that is cut on the 3-inch line, like that of your easy 8, and you will need a strip cut on the 3.5-inch line with a traditional ruler. So we'll get out our regular ruler, and we know that a 3-inch finished edge means that with a traditional ruler, we cut on the 3.5-inch line so that after seam allowance, we'll have 3-inch finished edge. All right, so I'll cut my strip on the 3.5-inch line, and then I am ready to cut my triangles. Earlier, I showed you that to do an 8-pointed star using this method, we actually created a large half square triangle. That involved doing a small triangle with our easy angle and a larger one. The small one is going to be the one that is going to come from our strip that we cut using our easy 8 on the 3-inch line. Okay, so we're going to cut it right on the 3-inch finished line. There's our strip, and to cut these triangles, this small triangle, we need to give ourselves a clean edge, of course, first. And after we have our clean edge, then we're going to use the tool a little bit differently. We're going to remember that we can get a full seam allowance because of that flat top. So I'm going to push the flat top of the ruler up to the top edge of my fabric. my left edge of my easy angle tool is going across the left edge of my fabric like that. And now I'm going to cut along the diagonal line. It isn't actually going to meet with any of the horizontal lines there. That's why you have to be sure that that flat top meets the flat top of the fabric. So holding that in place, I'll cut, and I usually do 2 at a time. So I have 2 of my smaller triangles ready to sew. Then I'm going to take my easy angle and flip it like we've done before. And this time I'm going to push up until that little black flag is just hanging below the line of the fabric. And then I'm going to line up the diagonal line of the fabric and check again to be sure the flag is below, just below the line of the bottom edge of the fabric, and then I'll hold steady. Now again, the horizontal line is not lined up with anything on the tool. That's not what we're worried about. We just need that flat top and we need that diagonal line to be correct. Hold steady and cut straight up. And now we have a second set. So now we're up to 4. Each block will need 8 of those. All right, so let's cut 2 more. I have my 8 small triangles cut that will make the half square triangle for my 8-pointed star. And now I need to cut my 8 triangles that will make the large triangle space right there. So for that, we cut a traditional 3.5-inch strip because it's going to line up with the finished 3-inch edge of our 8-pointed star that we cut with our easy 8. And then we cut like we usually cut on an easy angle, starting with the words face up. So I see easy angle, push it to the corner. This strip is 3.5 inches. So I see 3.5 inch in the corner. I hold my ruler steady and cut. And there I have 2 of them. And then take my ruler and flip it up and then slide it over. So just the flag is hanging below the line. The diagonal edge matches. And right here in the corner, I do see 3.5 because this is a traditional strip cut at 3.5 inches. Then when I cut straight up, I have 2 more of my triangles cut and ready to go. I will need 8 for my star, so I will cut 4 more and then we'll be ready to start putting our star together. When I'm ready to put my 8-pointed stars together using the no set-ins way of doing it, it is really important to lay out exactly where my pieces are going to go. So I take my diamonds and I actually divide them in 2. So 1, 2, 3, 4 of them are going to be going roughly like that direction. And then 1, 2, 3, 4 are going to be going that direction like that. Okay. And earlier in a video, I showed people how I like to make a square so I can see clearly that that's a big space that's going to have the secondary fabric. So we're going to make use of that square again today. The first thing I do then is I'm going to lay my secondary fabric in the place where it will be setting. And I'm also going to really pay attention to make sure that I have right side up. So I'm going to do right side up, and I know I need some in this top corner up here to finish the half square triangle over here on this side. I want my flat top to be facing the wider angle. Literally, I want my sharp point here to match my sharp point there. So I'm going to put that one there. Then if I'm going right side up, that one fits there like that. Here's the next one, flat top to flat top, point to point. Then right side up on this side, point to point. There's 2, there's 3, and here is 4, all laying in place right side up. That's where those are going to be sewn together, just like that. Now we need to place our 3.5-inch triangles into place, and they are going to fit in this square right here. When we cut the triangle from a 3.5-inch strip, we know that that finished edge is going to be 3 inches, and that means it's going to match the 3-inch finished line of our diamond. So let's put those side by side, because when we sew them, this line is going to match up with that line. I have my flat point toward the wide angle again, and I have the point of this triangle making the point of that half square triangle. Right side is up, and I'll do the other side, and there's one, and lay out. There's the second one, 2, 3, and 4. Now that I have it all laid out, there's the fourth one right there. Now I can begin to sew. And I always sew the small triangles in place first. I always do half first, and then I'll do the other half, and then we'll put the two sides together. All right, so to get this ready to go, I take up one. I know, because I've laid it down flat, that this piece and this piece are going to go together right here. And the nifty thing is that the flat spot on my triangle meets up perfectly with that angle of my diamond. And so I'm going to put a pin right here. I'm going to put a pin down here. And when we go to the sewing machine, we always start with the point, and we're just going to sew a 1/4-inch seam straight down. We don't have to worry about a stop sign or anything. We can go all the way from one end to the other. I'm going to sew those together, and then I'll show you what it looks like. So we have taken every pair with the small triangle and the diamond, and we've sewn them together, 1/4-inch seam from the point down to all the way down to the end. And then I iron toward the diamond. I want my diamond to stand out. So if I iron toward the diamond, then usually that's what will happen. Once again, I'm going to take these pieces and I'm going to lay them down in place on my cutting mat, because every time I do put it back, the way it's going to go, eventually, I have less chance of making a mistake. My next thing to do then is to take each of these pieces that we just sewed together and attach them to one of the larger triangles. And the nifty thing about this is that because we did the little triangle first, we actually have a right angle right there, correct? And here's our right angle on our triangle. So if we do right sides together and push that right up to the corner like that, then we're just going to simply sew 1/4-inch seam all the way down to the end, and don't have to worry about stopping early. Just go end to end, and you will have all of your larger triangles attached to your half square triangle. So let's go do that next. Now we have sewn the larger triangle to the diamond, and we've ironed towards the diamond. And when we lay that piece in place back here, we can put the left half to the right half like that, and we'll have a square. So my next task is to take one left piece and one right piece, just like we've been laying it out every time, and we're going to put them right sides together. And the first place I'm going to make sure they match are right at the diamond intersection right there, and I'll put a pin in place there. Then I'll come up here to the top of where the diamond peak meets, and I'll put a pin in there. And then I'll come down here to the bottom where the secondary fabric meets, and I'll put a pin there. And then I'm going to sew a straight 1/4-inch seam from one point to the other point, and then we'll have our squares. 4 squares together will make our 8-pointed star. Once we sewed 2 triangles together like this, then we got the square like that, And then if you remember from previous moments where I told you every time I see two diamonds like this that kind of look like a pair of pants, I always lay them down and I iron to the left. And this is no exception. We're going to do it that way again this time. So we're going to iron to the left, and when we have all four of them that way, then we can start to see our 8-pointed star. So the next step will be to take this square and sew it to that square, and this square and sew it to that square, just like that. So we sewed the two squares together along the line, and then once again, to iron it, we looked at our pair of pants and we pushed it open to the left so that we have that line going counterclockwise. Every single seam is going counterclockwise on the top and on the bottom. Finally, we get to put our top half to our bottom half, and then we will have our 8-pointed star without doing any set-ins. So once we sewed that seam all the way across with our final two pieces, then we continued ironing counterclockwise, and we have a perfect point because we were consistent with that. And even if you look on the back, it's a little messy, but there is a pinwheel going around. So we know that we have everything in the right place. We have put together an 8-pointed star, and it is ready for our quilt. Well, friends, now you have learned the tricks for using your Easy 8 to create beautiful 8-pointed stars. Maybe you're going to do the method where there are set-ins and Y-seams involved, but they are not difficult. Or maybe you're going to try with our easy angle and no set-ins. Either way, I hope you're going to go dust off that Easy 8 and get started. And as always, have a wonderful day and happy sewing!